everyone. My name is Adina Vogel-Ayalon, Vice President and Chief of Staff at J Street, and I'm pleased to be here with all of you to have a discussion about the topic of our conversation, which is Gaza needs more than a ceasefire, an opportunity to really dive in with Israeli and Palestinian human rights and policy experts about the state of affairs in Gaza today. We know that, of course, the Gaza ceasefire has been in effect since October, and there has been a partial withdrawal of the Israel Defense Forces, but they still do control the majority of the Strip. The population, the population in Gaza, which amounts to over 2 million people, about 1.5 million of which, according to the UN, have actually been displaced, are in need of emergency shelter items. We've been tracking reports coming out of Gaza about the weather, right? Recent rains right now in the region, it is winter. And so there have been floods, intense, no access to electricity and running water for many people throughout Gaza, right? This is all to give a sense of sort of the really precarious living conditions that still are still a reality today for Palestinian civilians in Gaza. And I think that's important for us to keep in mind. While we, of course, are very grateful that there is a ceasefire, although even now, just earlier today, there had been exchanges of fire and airstrikes that were just reported on earlier, right before this call that I saw. But broadly, there is the war as we knew it is over, but that doesn't mean that the reality on the ground for people in Gaza has exponentially improved or changed. And that's the purpose of us being able to come here together to actually really understand what is happening on the ground, and what are the barriers to making this situation better, to improve. And we will be diving into also aspects of the healthcare situation, access to medical care. I want to remind folks who are on this call that J Street has been activating all of you in support of a bicameral letter, a letter that is both supported by senators and members of the House, to really call for attention to address the medical needs and access to medical care that Palestinians in Gaza require today. So I encourage you all to sign our petition and to contact your members of Congress to get them to sign onto that letter. And we will also be discussing in this call about the new Civil Military Coordination Center that is run by the United States that's playing a real active role in Gaza's post-war future. There are reports also saying that they are seeking to play an even more significant role than the Israeli coordinator of government activities in the territory. And so we are going to unpack all of these issues with our incredible speakers, who I'm really grateful for taking the time late at night to be with us today. And I'll introduce you each, and then we will go into moderated Q&A. And I encourage folks also to put your questions into the Q&A box, and we will try to address them as well. So first, I'm pleased to introduce Tania Hary, who is the Executive Director of Gisha, Israel's leading organization promoting freedom of movement for Palestinians in Gaza. And she is a widely relied upon expert on movement and access, briefing UN Security Council 3 different times, an incredible resource to us at J Street and also to our members of Congress here in the United States. So thank you, Tania. Guy Shalev, who is a medical anthropologist and also the executive director of Physicians for Human Rights Israel, which is a leading organization advocating for the right to health in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territory. He is a recognized expert on humanitarian and health impacts of the Gaza blockade and occupation, and frequently speaks on the structural barriers to medical care for Palestinians. Again, we were just discussing before that this letter that is circulating in the House really highlights some of the key policy asks and concerns that Physicians for Human Rights Israel have been raising. So Guy, thank you so much for being here and looking forward to diving into your expertise on those matters. And last but not least, Bushra Khalidi, who is Oxfam's policy lead in the occupied Palestinian territory, guiding the organization's work on Gaza and the West Bank. She leads Oxfam's policy and advocacy on humanitarian access, protection, and accountability, and is a key voice representing Gaza's realities in international forum. Also, an incredible resource for us at J Street, as well as to our elected representatives here in the US. So again, thank you to all three of you for making the time to be with us for this important conversation. I am going to turn to each one of you to reflect first on just the title of this panel, which is Gaza Needs More Than a Ceasefire, and to share with us how that resonates with you, given the reality on the ground and the specific area of expertise that you work on. So I'll start with you, Tania, and then I'll go to each one of you.
Sure. So thanks so much for organizing this, and I want to thank everyone who joined the call. I mean, as we said, it's maybe not the most uplifting conversation, but I personally think one of the most important conversations to be having. So thanks for being with us. Actually, since the ceasefire came into effect on October 10th, it's estimated that some 280 people have actually been killed. So I think that when we're talking about ceasefire, we need to take it into account that even the kind of firing from the air, land, and sea hasn't stopped completely. But what I wanted to reflect on was this issue of survival. What we heard from people in the days after the ceasefire was that, yeah, sure, there might be a level of relief, that they can sleep at night without concern that a bomb is going to be dropped onto their homes, but that they're still very much in survival mode, that they're now concerned with the kind of daily operations of life, how to secure enough water, how to secure enough food, how to get the medications that maybe one of their family members need. So it's a kind of survival of a different kind. And I think we owe it to people in Gaza to continue to pay attention, to not look away just because this most acute and horrific of needs is somewhat eliminated.
Thanks, Tania. Bushra.
Thanks, Adina, and really thanks also to everybody for being here tonight or today. And yeah, I can't echo more what Tania said about how important this conversation is. I'm speaking from the West Bank. I'm in Ramallah. And I really want to also start by saying very clearly that we absolutely needed the ceasefire. We needed the bombs to stop, but it's not an end to the violence. It's not an end to the massacres that we saw. It's a change of form, and Tania spoke to it. I mean, it's also a very fragile ceasefire, and we're still, like you said, Adina, seeing airstrikes in Gaza City and Khan Yunis, and today in Mawasi. So civilians are still being killed, including today near a shelter where that's supposed to be a safe place for civilians, and at the same time, Israel is conditioning the reopening of crossings, and so even Rafah remains closed up to today. We have over nearly, I mean, more than 70,000 and probably much more Palestinians that have been killed, and we have more than 200,000 Palestinians that have been injured. And so that's the daily reality that Palestinians and that Tania talked about that they're dealing with as well. There's a UNOSAT report that came out that says that more than 81% of all structures in the Strip have been damaged or completely destroyed. Over 320,000 homes. I mean, that's immense. These are not just numbers. These are grossly immense numbers. So even when people go home, very often there's nowhere to return to. And so when we say Gaza needs more than a ceasefire, we mean a ceasefire is the bare minimum to stop the immediate killing. But if you're keeping people under a siege, and if you block recovery and reconstruction, and you exclude Palestinians from decisions about their own future, you don't have peace. You have acquired a form of the same injustice, really.
Thanks, Bushra. Guy.
Right, so I think what we're seeing now is the continuation of the Gaza genocide. And the reason why I see this as a continuation is because, first of all, acts that have been that we've seen in the past 2 years still affect the health of Palestinians in Gaza, even if there's a ceasefire. And the other thing is policies that are still in place that still infringe on the right to health of Palestinians and causing the continuing extermination of Palestinians in Gaza. Just in short, a whole healthcare system that was destroyed is not yet rebuilt, is not yet able to protect and serve the people of Gaza. If there were 3,500 hospital beds before the genocide began, now we're still with a little over 1,000 beds, hospital beds, serving more than 2 million people. We have more than 11,000 cancer patients who cannot get cancer treatment. So people keep dying because of the health conditions that were created during the genocide. And there are, as I said, still policies in place. Still, hospitals and medical facilities are not restocked with the equipment and medication they need. This is not something that should have been even a question during the genocide. Definitely now, after the so-called ceasefire. Doctors that want to get into Gaza are still blocked by COGAT, by the Israeli military mechanism. Doctors that are still held, doctors and medical workers still held in Israeli detention facilities are not released, almost 100 of them. So these people cannot go back to the Gazan hospital and care for their people. Just talking about the detention centers, we just published a report yesterday about death in Israeli detention centers. Only in the past month, 4 detainees died in Israeli facilities. So people keep dying in these contexts, and unfortunately, we don't see the ceasefire as something that stops even the killing of people. So, as the title of this unfortunate call says, definitely we need much more than a ceasefire in order to protect and save basically the people of Gaza.
Thanks, Guy. And I thank each one of you for sharing those introductory remarks, which I think give a helpful overview and understanding of the continuous dire situation that exists right now in Gaza for Palestinians today. And I want to dive into some of those issues that you mentioned. I want to start first with understanding the current state of affairs in Gaza when it relates to food and access to food. And so, Gisha has published a report also about the food production sector essentially being entirely decimated throughout the war. Bakeries and factories and agricultural lands that are either destroyed or are completely inaccessible. Hunger, of course, is still an issue throughout the trips. Throughout the strip. And there's also been differing reports about the type of aid that is coming in right now to the strip, right? How many trucks are coming in that are humanitarian aid trucks? What is commercial goods? So I'm hoping, Tania, that you can help us make sense of exactly really what is the state of affairs right now in terms of access to food and also the food production sector at this moment in time.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I'm grateful that you're highlighting this issue because I think, people outside of Gaza have gotten used to speaking in terms of aid only, as if that's all there is. And I think it's, part of the process of dehumanization. It's like reducing people to this bare minimum, as if they're just mouths to feed, as if, all they need is aid. And in fact, Gaza, before all of this, was also a place that was supplying its own food in large part. Agricultural fields, croplands, livestock, supporting about 40% of local consumption of produce in the strip. You had the fishing sector. So at various times, fishermen could go out to different distances, depending on the distances they could go, catching a wider variety of fish and supplying the local population that way. There were about 130 factories producing food, different kinds of food, also reliant on the agricultural sector. So things like jams, honey, cookies, you had a Coca-Cola bottling plant that opened in the last few years in Gaza. So just to give a kind of taste, a sense of what was happening before, virtually all of that has been destroyed. And not just destroyed, it was destroyed very quickly. I mean, within the first days, actually, after October 7th, Israel bombed and destroyed the Gaza seaport and basically just flooded and bombed the ships that were in that port. So even if there weren't this total restriction on the access to the sea, which is still in place, there were no boats anymore to go out into sea. And so it meant basically that very, very quickly, Israel created complete dependence on external aid, over which, of course, it had total control. And what we've said throughout and what we've now documented in these 3 reports that we released was how then Israel used this destruction of the food sector and its control over aid as a tool for displacement, as a tool for punishment, as a tool for pressure over the population. And unfortunately, that has not changed significantly. You do have the terms of the ceasefire that say something like 600 trucks should come in, but it's not a fundamental shift in approach. It's not a recognition of responsibility towards the population. It's not a recognition of responsibility for their needs. It's this temporary situation that as long as everything stays in place, maybe this will happen. So to kind of look at what is happening on the ground right now, what we're hearing from aid organizations, and I'm sure Bushra can speak to this specifically, is that the private sector is actually being prioritized. So of that total of 600 trucks per day, we understand those numbers are not being reached. There are no publicly available numbers, in fact. We do have some numbers from the UN system, so what is entering under the UN mechanism, and it's of course far below that, but we don't know how many of the private sector trucks are coming in. But by prioritizing the private sector, basically what's happening is that you're perpetuating deprivation in the Strip, because the vast majority of the population cannot afford what is coming in to the private markets. They are still reliant on aid, and so you're talking about these, on a good day, maybe a few hundred aid trucks that can get in, having then to be dispersed throughout the Strip to a population that is desperate for these items. And of course, the aid that's coming in is not just food. You need shelter equipment that takes up massive space. You need medical supplies, et cetera. So we're still seeing, hunger. We're still seeing, for example, nutrition sites where children are still, reliant on these sites to kind of get back on their feet. And like I said, because of this domination of the private sector of these trucks coming in, prices still being high on the local market, and goods, essential goods, being out of the reach of the population. So we really need to see a fundamental shift in approach. We think the private sector is important. We're not saying to not allow the private sector to operate, but we need to see all of the crossing points open. We need to see them operate at full capacity. For example, food is not allowed via the Jordan corridor. We don't understand why. There's all kinds of restrictions. We can go into the details about it if it's interesting to people, but there are just a long list of really unexplainable restrictions that could be lifted and that could then improve this aid response right away.
Thanks, Tanya. And I do want us to go to, to understand a little bit more about those restrictions. Just to follow up from like a very specific question in the Q&A, and you mentioned, inadequate nutrition. Are you still seeing reports of individuals, people dying from malnutrition in the Strip?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, look, it takes a long time to recover from, conditions related to malnutrition. And it's a whole response that a person would need. It's not just, having food overnight. It's having the right kind of food. It's having the supplements that you need. It's having access to health care. It's having access to clean water, to sanitation. And frankly, none of that is in place in the Strip. So obviously, there are heroic efforts underway to try to save lives, but certainly we are still hearing about people dying what are essentially preventable deaths, or dying of illnesses that their bodies are simply not strong enough to recover from.
Thanks, Tanya. Before I go to you, Guy, to talk a little bit more about this from a healthcare perspective, Bushra, I was hoping if you can elaborate more on what your understanding is of the most urgent needs right now as it pertains also to shelter specifically, but any other specific basic needs that you think are not being met, and of course also that Oxfam is paying great attention to.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I first want to also just like kind of clarify, or I don't want to talk in numbers, and I know it's become this metric, but I know Tanya would agree with me. Like, also, you know, the number of trucks doesn't mean anything. Like, if I tell you that 600 trucks have entered DC, like, you know, what does that tell you of it meeting the population? It tells you nothing. And so the way we also measure the way, you know, progress is made on the ground is whether these needs are met. And Tanya said it, like, people are dying from, you know, diarrhea, and utterly preventable diseases. So I want to also, like, we need to also move away from this counting trucks, because it means nothing. Because even if we flooded Gaza with thousands of trucks today, those needs are still not met. And just on the nutrition bit, I just want to add, it's not even about dying of hunger. The long-term impact of hunger on children is forever. Like, that is irreversible. So that's also, I think, and probably, I mean, Guy is probably more of an expert and a doctor. I am not a doctor, so I'm saying that from the humanitarian perspective. So, and so I really also want people tonight to listen to the picture where this winter is being lived. You mentioned it. The rains were torrential last week. Actually, Tanya and I were at dinner that day, and it was raining so torrentially over dinner that the roof started leaking over the table and the dinner that we were at. And I mean, both of us like looked at each other. I know all of us at the table thought about, like, what is happening in Gaza right now. And so the shelter, we have through the UN-led coordination mechanism, we have divided kind of groups, and there's a group that like is responsible for shelter and shelter items and coordinating that entry of those materials. So there are actually tents and tarps that have entered Gaza. But for example, the poles for the tents are dual use items considered by Israel. So they are not allowed to enter Gaza. And if they have, they've entered on some of these government to government trucks where, for example, it's not necessarily through the UN. It's those trucks that Tanya also mentions. It's private sector, but also, you know, the Emiratis have sent their trucks, the Qataris have sent their trucks, the Saudis have sent their trucks, and that's through their own kind of opaque, let's say, coordination of their materials. They have sent, for example, tents that are they're not up to par. They don't meet the standards that you need to be sending right now in Gaza for what people need. So they're flooding, they're not waterproof. The tarps that we've then given to these people that have received these tents that are not up to standards, because they don't go through the UN-led coordination mechanism. If it did, then we only accept things that are up to humanitarian standards. So this is also creating this parallel system of things entering that are not what should be entering Gaza right now. So we don't need chocolates and biscuits and Red Bull and Coke. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not allowed, but there needs to be a balance between what is needed in Gaza for people to recover and these private sector items as well. So we've been using these tarps to cover these tents that are not waterproof, but that's then, use of resource, that these tarps could be used for another family that is, homeless. So these are the issues that we're, dealing with on a day-to-day. And of course, at the same time, we have over 6,700 trucks of shelter and basic items that are literally stuck outside the borders of Gaza and the region, waiting for permission to enter and potentially will never enter. We've also seen over 100 aid requests rejected by Israel in just the first few weeks of the ceasefire, including blankets and basic water and sanitation items. So when you're seeing the images that we saw last week of families literally flooding in tents, that's not because the humanitarian system doesn't know what to do. The supplies exist, but they're packed, they're labeled, they're in our warehouses in Jordan, they're sitting at the crossing points, but the bottleneck is political. It's access, right? It's not about the logistics. So, and tents alone, are not the solution, of course. Many camps now are in Al-Mawasi, which is a low-lying area on a beach, on an empty beach with no infrastructure, with no sanitation, with no electricity, and also, of course, rubble-filled areas around. There's no drainage, there's no proper waste management, there's not enough fuel to, or actually, it's not that, there's not enough, the power generators that you need to run the wastewater systems to serve a larger population are not allowed, because you're only allowed 30 kilowatts, whatever, generator, because otherwise anything above that is considered dual use by Israel. And of course, the dual use items contains over 7,000 items at the moment. That's what we've heard from this new coordination logistics mechanism system, that there's about a 7,000, dual use item on Israel's arbitrary kind of list. So when it rains, and we're already in that season, these tents and these shelters are flooding. The sewage is mixing with whatever, drinkable-ish water that exists in Gaza. And people are literally sleeping in soaked bedding in Gaza. I mean, that is the reality we're dealing with. And I think it's really important to also explain, and like Tania said it, and thank you for starting by talking about, how Gaza was before. People had there was no homeless people in Gaza. It did not exist. I mean, I was in Gaza in September 2023. I walked around many of the neighborhoods in Gaza. I did not see one homeless person. That does not exist in these kind of very strong community-based, cities and towns, and that you also see across the West Bank, by the way. And now people are soaked in beddings, in tents. So, and without also the machinery that is also not allowed to enter Gaza to clear the rubble. You can't bring in heaters, you can't bring in timber, you can't bring in ceiling kits, you can't bring in mobile storage unit for warehouses so that we can store all these materials as well. It's a disaster zone. So honestly, it's so to say that, ceasefire, for us, this is the situation we're dealing with, and we're still dealing with the siege, and we're still dealing with the, collective punishment, and the continuing genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza.
Thanks, Bushra, for touching on, so many aspects of this really dire situation, obviously, that you just outlined so clearly. Going back to, of course, the medical situation, and Guy, you started to touch on that in your first remarks about the state of the healthcare situation, and also lack of access to equipment, et cetera. But one thing specifically that is the topic also of this, or one of the topics included in this bicameral letter that we were talking about, where we've put the link to the petition, is about medical evacuations. Can you talk a little bit more about what is happening right now with individuals in Gaza that are critically injured, in the need of life-saving evacuation, and are awaiting opportunities for transfer? What are their options, and what are the current restrictions on those options?
Right. So I think we've heard from Tania and Bushra a lot about all these different bureaucratics. And I think what maybe someone can listen to these things and think about indifference, but this is not indifference on the side of Israel and the policies that are in place. These are all intentional policies. People sit in these rooms, and the leadership, the political leadership, makes these decisions, and these decisions have effect on people on the ground. And one of those decisions is the limitations or the blocking of medical evacuations. And then, as I mentioned before, the condition of the healthcare system in Gaza and what kind of services and treatments are available for the people in Gaza makes the situation that more than 16,000 people need urgent medical evacuation outside of the Gaza Strip in order to get life-saving treatments and treatments to injuries that are life-altering, basically. And then this is a number that cannot be met with all these kind of evacuations that are kind of sporadically sent to third countries. We see 100 people go to the UAE, then a number goes to Jordan. These are very small numbers. In total, in the past year and a half since Rafah was closed, only less than 3,000 people were evacuated in these kind of sporadic evacuations, when thousands and thousands of people are just waiting. The numbers of people who died just waiting for medical evacuations are at least over 800 people on the list. And it's also important to understand who gets to be on the list. In order to be on the list, you need to see a doctor, which is sometimes not something that's very easy in Gaza, even after the ceasefire. That doctor makes the decision that you need a medical evacuation. That needs to go to the Ministry of Health, to the WHO, and then so there are many people who are not even on that list and also need treatment outside of the Gaza Strip. And then there's a simple, very feasible solution, and that is allowing people to take this 1 hour ambulance drive from Gaza to East Jerusalem and the West Bank and be treated and their lives saved. And again, like all these other policies that Tania and Bushra talked about, it's just a decision, and a decision not to allow even one patient to leave Gaza to the West Bank and East Jerusalem. We need to understand that a lot of these patients that need evacuation cannot even survive the flight or a long trip to a third country. So this is their only option to go to East Jerusalem or the West Bank. Family members that can join them, knowing that they can return, because that is not entirely clear for people who are living to the other side of the world to get treatment. Being treated by Palestinians, by your people that want to serve and care for you, and know the conditions and know you. In many cases, these are people who still have their medical records in hospitals in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. And still Israel is not allowing that lifeline to reopen, because that was the case before the genocide, the October 7 attacks, and then the genocide afterwards. People got referrals from Gaza and could go to hospital in the West Bank in East Jerusalem. And that was cut off in October 7. And ever since then, we just cannot make that corridor reopen. And that is something that we understand very clearly is not something that will be just made by a decision by the Israeli government. We need pressure, and basically what we need is American pressure, because we understand that this is the only way to get this policy to change. And that is why a letter to politicians urging American politicians to get involved in this issue. It's a very basic humanitarian demand and ask just to save thousands of people. Many of them are children.
Thank you, Guy. And I want to pick up on this last point about the role of the United States, and specifically connected to some of the questions that I see already in the Q&A about the role that the United States can play here, and specifically also the CMCC. What is your current, right? You've outlined a whole series of issues with restrictions, with dual use, right? With being able to approve or deny, right? We know also that there are certain aid organizations that are now being denied registration by the coordinator of government activities in the territory in Gaza. But at the same time, right, there is this plan that is being put out, right? The 20-point plan. And part of it is this stronger US hand in humanitarian affairs, also on the ground with the Civil Military Coordination Center. So I would like to understand from you, where do you see opportunities to improve coordination with this body, if at all, if you do see that is a possibility? How can we build trust between right? Because that, I would also note, right, is has been a serious issue that has existed between, right, the Israeli authorities and the aid organizations. There's a severe lack of trust. How can we repair that scenario now with this new body? Is that possible? What role do you see this new Civil Military Coordination Center playing in perhaps addressing some of these restrictions? And then that's the first part. And then I would love to understand, how do you see the ability to put pressure on this body to make the necessary changes to actually start improving the situation on the ground and amending a lot of these restrictions to actually help and address the needs of the Palestinian people in Gaza. So I'll start first with you, Tania, and then I'd like to take Guy and Bushra, your reactions as well.
Can I suggest Bushra go first? Bushra, do you mind?
Sure.
Sure.
Well, she and I were just yapping about the CMCC. I want to hear what she has to say.
New kid in town. Um, so maybe I don't know how informed our audience is tonight. I think a lot of people maybe don't know what the CMCC is. So it's a body that now exists. It's kind of recognized indirectly now in the broader kind of architecture that the Security Council just voted on Monday, but like you said, Adina, as part of the Trump plan. I think the intention is to organize logistics and deconfliction, and support potentially aid delivery. And of course, as humanitarians, we're always going to welcome anything that's genuinely and in good faith improves safe and predictable access into Gaza. But it's been now, I think, 5 weeks that it's been operational. I think there are opportunities to engage with the CMCC, but as humanitarians, we have to be extremely clear about its limits and its purpose, because of course it brings actors who haven't always been in the same room. Humanitarian agencies, we have donors, militaries, technical experts, and may create opening to discuss and the predictable kind of entry of goods and etc. But I have explained the current situation in Gaza. On the ground, we're not seeing enough progress weeks into the ceasefire. And of course, it's a new body, so it's still learning, it's still shaping kind of its own, architecture and culture. So potentially, humanitarian voices could help ensure it becomes, a supportive and facilitative mechanism rather than a gatekeeper. But trust is absolutely very low between aid agencies and Israeli authorities. I would say, we've experienced 2 years of rejections, of siege, of opaque decisions, of public rhetoric that have questioned our neutrality and our impartiality and our work and our dedication to the humanitarian response in Gaza. So maybe a space like that could repair some of that. But I want to talk about accountability. It doesn't mean that there's a CMCC and that there's a Trump plan, that accountability for war crime, accountability for genocide is not still on the table and should not still be on the table. And that's when I talk about principles. We have a mandate. We have colleagues that were killed in Israeli airstrikes in the last 2 years, and we know that it's been a record number of humanitarian workers killed in the last 2 years. We need accountability for that. So what we need is the respect of international law. And of course, a mechanism like that could make a difference, but we also cannot be treating the issues on the ground like logistical problems that and that's how I tried to explain it. These are failing by design. So CMCC also has to use its political leverage to unblock these barriers, rather than becoming a new layer of bureaucracy that frankly we really don't need, as I explained. So if so, yeah, it could improve humanitarian access. But right now, the way we are, I mean, humanitarians are in that space is strictly to basically gather information, understand how this operational structure is kind of set up, and maybe kind of correct the record when it is, but we're not engaging in terms of an influencing space yet. I mean, we're not seeing it that way. And also, just to make it clear, from what we're seeing as well, this is not a decision-making body. That's not where decisions are being made. So there's not much influencing to be done. So really, I think it's more of an intel sharing space amongst a broader kind of a group of actors.
I want to add just one more. Thank you, Bushra. I want to add one more question into the mix before Tania and Guy, and perhaps you can also touch on this from your understanding. And Bushra also, maybe it makes sense also to go back to you. One, you had noted earlier also that there hasn't been a Palestinian voice that's been involved in this in these conversations, right, about addressing the humanitarian needs on the ground. We know, right, at the level of the regional actors, right, that are most engaged, and you mentioned those that have access, right? Qatar, the Emirates, Saudi, right, are able to have their own coordination mechanisms. But do you see those actors, as well as Egypt and Jordan, and other Arab states, as opportunities to help inform some of this decision-making process that is being done, because they do seem to have a significant role in helping to, or a role right now, and access to the US administration and how they're thinking about the international stabilization force. Do you see that same type of pressure from the Arab states also being incorporated into the conversation about the humanitarian situation on the ground? So I would just want to add that in as like another piece of the advocacy on behalf of addressing all of the issues that you laid out as a question to you. And perhaps maybe Tanya, you could go first, and Guy, and then come back to you, Bushra, for your perspective on that.
Sure, that's a tough one. Give me the tough one. Look, I mean, there's obviously not a ton of transparency about like the conversations that are happening between these actors. I do certainly think it's clear that Trump is looking over his shoulder at what the Saudis and what others think of what he's doing. But I'm a deeply cynical and critical-minded person, especially after these last 2 years, and I think that none of these actors are driven by the values I think they should be driven by, and which I think the people who are participating on this call and on this panel are driven by. And so if it's an interests-based approach, it means it can be finicky and it can change very quickly. So I do think that our role as humanitarians, as human rights activists, as people who care about the region, needs to bring in that lens. The needs of the population must be met. It cannot be contingent on whether we get to this or that stage of the ceasefire and whether this or that thing holds. And my concern right now with all of the framework and of the Security Council resolution that was passed, it's legitimizing this kind of making basic rights contingent on political progress in the ceasefire. So that's one thing I wanted to add. I wanted to go back to also what Bushra said. I like this line that she said, the bottleneck is political. So to keep in mind, again, the CMCC, the people who are sitting at these tables, they're not there to sort of solve complicated logistical problems. The problems are not complicated at all. It's a question of political will. And if the political will is in place, a lot can happen. One thing that is really not clear is who is in charge or who's going to be in charge. And if I had to put money on it, I would say Israel will continue to be in charge no matter who is the face of these processes. And that means that we'll see an ongoing kind of or continuation of these policies limiting what can go in. The questions of dual use, I mean, I think even using that terminology, that is Israel's terminology, to say these items are dual use. I mean, these are profoundly civilian items that are needed for the humanitarian response for everything, for water, sanitation, healthcare. So if Israel continues to have leverage over every single item that can go in, it doesn't matter if it's the CMCC that's putting the final stamp on the approval or rejection, or Israel. At the end of the day, you need a fundamental recognition of the rights of the people, and that's what's driving the policy, not the interests of one group or another, and certainly not Israel's very limited view of its responsibilities. So my concern about all of this stuff, I think you could take this positive view that some people are trying to have of, oh, it's good to have an arbitrator or somebody else in the room, so it's not just Israel and and the Palestinians. But I think you need to look at, are those actors that you can trust, and whose interests do they have in mind? And yeah, I'm unfortunately not at a place where I can be very optimistic about that process. And I'm concerned too that it sort of blurs the boundaries of the responsibility. Israel is the occupying power. It will remain the occupying power, and therefore it has duties to the civilian population. It doesn't matter, who is sitting in that room in Kiryat Gat. We need to keep the focus on who has control over the situation, and that's Israel.
And I would say also, right, I mean, in terms of responsibility being on Israel, though, what I think this mechanism opens up, though, is still this question about, right, where is the leverage and where is the pressure that can be placed, right, on the responsible actors to make the necessary changes. And that's something that, of course, we're very focused on continuing to put pressure on the United States to continue to put that pressure to ensure that the responsible actor is making the necessary policy changes that we think are key. Guy, I wanted to open it up to you to also, give your perspective, both on, CMCC, levers of pressure, how you view also the regional actors, if at all, as actors in terms of that advocacy and pressure.
Right. So there are humanitarian principles that we know and we've learned from other contexts, other conflict zones, other disaster zones in the world. And there's a reason why these principles are important. And we need to understand that this is a mechanism is being created while another mechanism is being dismantled and is still in the process of being dismantled. So there's Palestinian organizations are designated as terror organizations or sanctioned by the administration, the American administration. International organizations are subjected to a new registration law that really limits their ability to act according to humanitarian principles. Israel-based organizations are now, there's a legislation that is about to really make our just possibility of working and active is also kind of limiting in terms of the taxation law. And probably this is something I hope some of our viewers are also following. So there's a dismantling of a mechanism, and most importantly, UNRWA, right? An organization, a UN agency that employed more than 30,000 people in Gaza and had hundreds of distribution points, that's dismantled, right? And it is important because when you have mechanisms that are supported by the community, that are recognized and trusted by the community, that is the most important humanitarian principle. Because it is not very hard to get food or medication to a 30-year-old man who can fight for what he needs. But if you want to get to the older woman in a tent or to a sick child, you need a community. You need everyone to trust the system. You need everyone to be part of that. And that is exactly what we're not seeing right now. Tania and Bushra talked about lack of transparency, but basically it means that this mechanism is not gaining the trust of the people, of the communities that are supposed to be served by these mechanisms. And that is something that's very critical. And also, Bushra talked about accountability, and I think that is also part of that, because this mechanism is part of that, and the dismantling of the mechanism that was in place is a mechanism of buying silence. Organizations or individuals that will be allowed to be part of this mechanism, allowed to get into Gaza and provide services and actually talk to the people, collect testimonies and evidence of what's on the ground, these are people who are going to be very silent about whatever they see, because they need to keep working with the Americans, they need to keep working with the Israelis. So it's not like we're going to see, like we've seen in previous attacks on Gaza, international organizations coming in, collecting testimonies, collecting evidence of war crimes and crimes against humanity. We're not going to see that, because all these are being blocked in the name of a new mechanism that's not in any way neutral, and it serves the interests of Israel and the US. And I think one of the most important things is what we see as the future of Gaza. And you mentioned all these processes. Palestinians are not part of these mechanisms, not part of these plans, not leading definitely these plans. And the effect of that, first of all, it's not the right thing to do in terms of serving the population and consulting the experts. And the experts are the people from the communities who need that support. And also, it's in terms of creating or it's not even rebuilding, because it was not sustainable even before October 7, but building a Gaza that is sustainable. And if a lot of the resources, billions and billions of dollars, are going to pour into mechanisms that are just foreign-led, temporary, not into the actual hospitals that Gazans operate and have built in years of hard work and with the support of the community, just creating like kind of field hospitals, all kind of solutions that are not going to support a sustainable Gazan society that can then rebuild itself. That's, I think, where a lot of these billions are just going to the trash and not going to serve Palestinians in the future.
Thanks, Guy. One of the things specifically also for J Street that has been most important is, there's a bunch of questions here in the chat also about Palestinians being involved in, helping to form policy and rebuild Gaza and, being involved, of course, in the CMCC. One of the things, of course, that is most important to us is that Palestinian voice, is that voice of the Palestinian Authority. Obviously, we do not see Hamas as an actor to be involved in these conversations, but of course there are Palestinian experts, there are Palestinian politicians, there are Palestinian technocrats, there are a variety of Palestinian civil society organizations that need to be brought into the conversation and need to be brought into all levels of the conversation, whether it's security or humanitarian or political, about the future of Gaza. So I appreciate you really focusing on that point. So we're heading out to the top of the hour, and I would like to give each of you the opportunity to leave us with a message that you want to share with J Street's community, with the American Jewish community, with our political advocacy organization, about your key priorities and key message to us that you want to make sure that we continue to uplift in our work here in the United States. So Bushra, I'll start with you and then go one by one.
So final thoughts. Sorry, Adina, I missed the beginning of the.
Yeah, I would like for you to give us a message,
Yeah.
or
Got it.
policy priority that you want to make sure that our community internalizes and uplifts.
What I want to say is that now is not the time to, lift the pressure because there's a ceasefire. I hope that the message is clear from what we discussed today. We need to also connect what is happening to Gaza to that. This is not happening in a vacuum, because under the cover of CMCC and the Americans Trump plan, there's the West Bank that's seeing an unprecedented escalation. We're seeing an annexation timeline unfold before our eyes. So and record level of settler violence, etc. So we have to keep in mind the entire Palestinian territory. We need to. I think the American Jewish community has been incredible in using its voice to put that pressure, and I think it needs to continue to do so. Now is the time. We can't let Gaza basically off the map. We track our media at Oxfam, and I'm one of their spokesperson. It's never been this low in terms of how the media is talking about and covering Gaza, and people are literally, you know, on the verge of dying of hypothermia in Gaza. So I know also many people tonight probably carry a lot of pain, you know, from what's happened in the last 2 years, and what is and about maybe anti-Semitism globally, and the attacks, of course, of October 7th, and about the fear that, you know, calling for Palestinian rights somehow means, you know, abandoning Jewish safety. But I want to say very clearly that it really doesn't. And from where I sit here in Ramallah in the West Bank as a Palestinian, what we're asking for is so simple and so universal. It's that, you know, our lives just basically carry the same value, that our children are not bombed and killed with complete impunity, or left to freeze, you know, in tents with trucks of aid that are sitting at kilometers across the border, and that we can live in safety and dignity in our own homes, and we are able to return to our homes. And I think the most powerful thing the American Jewish community can do right now is insist the safety for Israelis can't be built on the dispossession, the erasure, and the dehumanization of Palestinians. And that means that you have to oppose the siege, you have to oppose settlement expansion, you have to oppose the home demolitions, both in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza. And you have to demand that your elected representatives stop sending weapons that are being used to commit these grave violations and war crimes under international law. So, you know, very concretely, I think there's so much you can do in using that leverage to make sure that also the U.S. opens up Gaza, not just for food trucks, but for the full humanitarian pipeline and for people's freedom of movement. People should be allowed to leave. They should be trapped into the Strip, 2 million people, and the medical evacuations. And you must ask for the suspension of arms transfers and military support that is, you know, continues to carry out a serious violation of international law. And you have to support genuine accountability, because if you don't support accountability, this impunity will continue, and we will be back here a few years from now discussing the same thing. And I'm really, truly tired, you know, of talking about the same thing when we know what the root causes of this violence and all of it is. So that's my, I think, final message. Sorry for being a little lengthy.
Thanks, Bushra, and I appreciate you really emphasizing how the future of Israelis and Palestinians are really truly intertwined, and the security of both people and safety of both people and rights and dignity of both people is so clearly intertwined. And also, you know, we at J Street have been advocating for, you know, our military assistance being used according to international and U.S. law, and, you know, not calling for an arms embargo specifically, but for calling for there to be serious oversight and accountability mechanisms on our military assistance. So I appreciate you raising those points. I'm going to go to Guy and then to you, Tania.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think Bushra, I sign on every word she said, and just basically what this whole call is about, to call on people not to forget Gaza, not to think that we are past the attack, and we've seen that on many levels. We've seen decisions that were taken by Germany, by the UK about arms deals that are now being reinstated. Processes in the European Union considering the association agreement being halted, because it's easy to think that it's over and we can move on. And it's, I think, what I expect and wish for the Jewish American community is to remember us here, and not forget that the struggle is not over to end the genocide and to demand accountability. I want to add that one thing that the CMCC and this whole idea of the Americans taking control over Gaza is part of Israel's intention to create a distinction between Gaza and the rest of Palestine. And then we know already the Americans will control the crossings to Egypt, but then Israel will leave everything totally locked from the side from Gaza to the rest of Palestine. That is exactly what they want, to finally disconnect Gaza from Palestine. And we need to insist that no, Gaza is Palestine. Gaza needs to be part of a Palestinian future that is a freedom and dignity. And just adding that a genocide is a crime that attacks a people. So I think our obligation when we are resisting genocide is to have also obligation to the collective rights of Palestinians and of a future that is of self-determination, of freedom of the Palestinian as a collective, not only the saving life of Palestinian individuals. Yeah, for now.
Thanks so much, Guy. Very much also appreciate that emphasis on Palestinian self-determination and also the importance of connecting both Gaza and the West Bank when we talk about the future, political future for Palestinians. And that is very key to our work at J Street as well. Tania, please.
Yeah, I think my colleagues have really summed up all of the talking points. I'll just emphasize freedom of movement for people. Again, I think that the petition that you're organizing is super critical. You know, there are hospitals in Israel, in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem that are just waiting to receive patients. And we're talking about, you know, thousands of people who could be saved. And the US has a critical role to play. You know, almost every change that has happened over the last 2 years for the better has been because of US pressure. So a lot more can be done. And I do think that we should, you know, take people at their word. If they say that they're trying to get more aid in, yalla, let's work on that and hold them accountable to that. And I want to also add that, you know, students from Gaza are also trying to get to universities all over the world. They gave up on the US, but I do think that that's something that we should, you know, redouble our efforts and make sure that universities who are accepting Palestinian students can welcome them, hopefully for the coming academic year, if not now.
Thank you so much for adding that point, Tania, because I have heard a series of heartbreaking stories about Palestinians also that were intending to go actually to universities in the United States, that because of our policies now with visas, not providing visas to Palestinians, many Palestinians have not been able to attend university plans that they had made. And you know, that's on top of the restrictions that you outlined in terms of Palestinian freedom of movement. So I mean, we covered a lot, but we didn't cover everything. And there's, of course, more questions in the chat. And I know that people want the ability to be in touch with each one of you and to follow up with questions. And I'm sure that you all would welcome that. So I just want to thank you so much for being with us this evening. It's late at night there, and for, you know, exploring this very challenging topic. And I know that I just want to thank you on behalf of J Street for all of the work that you are doing on the ground every day, and for the helpful information and insight that you provide to us to allow us to do our political advocacy work here more effectively. I also want to plug our convention for all of you who are on this call. You know, these are the types of conversations that we will be having in panels throughout our convention from February 28th to March 3rd in Washington, D.C. We will also be having an advocacy day where we'll be able to go on the Hill and to talk with offices of our elected representatives and with our elected representatives about some of these key issues. I hope we will be in a better place by the end of February, but I really want to urge everyone on this call to register for the convention. I know Tania specifically has been probably at like every convention since the start of J Street's conventions, and we'll make that more of a reality for all of you. But I thank you again, and have a good night to our panelists, and a good rest of the day for everyone else who's joined us on the call. Thanks so much.
Thank you.